Skeleton in the closet is an idiomatic expression used to say that a particular person has hidden embarrassing secrets in his life story, and the same concept also applies to institutions. In this video, we'll show some of the skeletons in the closet of modern science, not in order to belittle the hard work and honest researchers or scientists, but to expose the questionable scientific positions, which in fact has unmerited some correct scientific work, to promote a naturalistic ideology, often without proper scientific and historical basis.
Eratosthenes of Cyrene was a Greek philosopher born in 276 BC, known for being the first person to calculate the circumference of the Earth. He knew that, at local noon on the summer solstice in Syene, modern Aswan, Egypt, the sun was directly overhead, casting no shadow, while in Alexandria, the same was not true. So, he measured the sun's angle of elevation at noon on the same day in Alexandria, and knowing both the distance and direction of Syene, he concluded that the Earth's circumference was 50 times the distance between the two cities. This ingenious experiment very often figures as one of the science's 10 most beautiful experiments. So much is that, the Noonday Project, measuring the circumference of the Earth, is worldwidely repeated, year after year, where we can read in its description, the goal of the Noonday Project is to have students measure the circumference of the Earth using a method that was first used by Eratosthenes over 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately, there is few problems with both the experiment, as well as with the Eratosthenes' prestige, as follow. He assumed that the sun was so distant that its rays reached the Earth's surface, in parallel to each other, while the simple observation of crepuscular rays refutes this idea. Regarding to credit given to Eratosthenes, at least in this experiment, is a mistake, because the real genius behind the experiment was Anaxagoras, who almost 2 centuries before Eratosthenes had figured out both the shadows info, the possibility to use them as mean to measure distance, and lastly, the distance from those mentioned cities. The main difference between both philosophers was, Anaxagoras was a flat earther, so his calculus found not the circumference of the Earth, rather, the distance from the Sun to Earth.
Hubble was a former astronomer, which had studied Cepheid variables and nebulae for years, till he came to the conclusion of, almost all stars showed in their lights a consistent shifting to red, indicating that they were going further from us. So, from this observation, was elaborate the idea of, if the stars are going further, may also indicates that, in a remote past, they should be pretty close to each other. Later, this concept became known as Big Bang, the origin of the universe. The first value for his constant was 465, plus or minus 50, kilometers per second squared per megaparsecs, which allow to estimate the age of the universe, around 2 billion years. Interestingly enough, the first contestation did not come from his fellow astronomers or physicists, rather, from geologists, as had, at the time, published work on the estimated age of the Earth, pointing to values between 3 and 4 billion years old, what put the entire universe younger than the very Earth. After the first revision of data, a new value for the receding constant was found, which placed an estimated age of the universe 10 billion years, so older than the Earth. But the new results also not pleased, this time, the astronomers, because they had published works of observations of clusters of stars, which estimated its age between 16 and 18 billion years, so older than 10 billion years of the universe that Hubble's constant indicated. The controversy went on for decades, and literally hundreds of scholars sought to determine the exact value for the constant, and the first 50 years after the first publication, over 250 different jobs brought different values. Ironically, the classical concept of expansion of the universe is currently under severe questioning, so that much of the scientific community considers the model of cosmic inflation more plausible than the original theory of the Big Bang, precisely because there is no consensus on the value of the receding rate.
The original cover of 1859 edition of the work of Charles Darwin had the following title: On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Only in the 6th edition, 13 years later, the title was shortened to The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. The original title has supported the ideas of prejudice, and, to some extent, gave scientific basis for slavery, where blacks were seen as an underdeveloped and not fully a human species. About Darwin's theory, is well recognized that the biologist's work, German naturalist and philosopher Haeckel, was largely responsible for the acceptance of the theory in Europe, giving lectures where showed the many similarities between embryos of different species in various stages of development. Interestingly, Haeckel, in addition to physician and biologist, was also designer, and used his artistic skill with drawings, to change the actual image of the embryonic stages, and give the false impression that, in fact, all embryos, even of different species, it has in its development many phylogenetic similarities. In 1874, Haeckel was caught in his fraud and taken to the university court, where he confessed to change only in some of his drawings. In 1997, Michael Richardson showed, in his article on the July issue of the scientific journal, Anatomy and Embryology, that Haeckel's fraud was greater than he had confessed, furthermore, proved that, indeed similarities are observed, but they are often in different stages of development, and also often, have different functions among the embryos of different species. These claims were supported by another research, by Dr. Stephen Gould, which also stated, in the Natural History of March 2000. Haeckel's defenders claim that, these charges are merely an attempt to belittle the biologist's work. However, no evidence to support this claim, and unfortunately, even today, despite all the certainty of fraud, the original drawings of Haeckel, or variations of them, are easily found in textbooks worldwide, viewed as proof and basis for the idea that ontology repeats the phylogenetic stages, known as ontophylogenetic law.
In 1916, Einstein introduced the complement of his theory, general relativity, which included among other ideas, gravity as the effect of the curvature suffered in the fabric spacetime, which abolished the Newtonian concept, where gravity was seen as attraction force. His new idea needed a confirmation to be accepted, and the best way to prove this, it would be during total eclipse of the sun. In all, it took 3 photographic records of eclipse, so the theory was finally confirmed. The first photographic record, in 1918, did not show the phenomenon of gravitational lens, predicted by the theory. The second record, in 1919, was analyzed by 2 different groups, and had 2 official results, one denying the phenomenon, another confirming. Only in the third record of a total solar eclipse, in 1924, it was observed a deflection of 1.2 arcseconds in the light of some stars, thus confirming the theory as valid. Other challenges were presented, stating that the bending of light would not be caused by gravity, but by the known optical phenomenon of refraction. This, and other alternative explanations were rejected, without knowing for what reason, and the result contrary 1919 was also discarded, becoming this year the official date of the first observation of gravitational lensing. Interestingly, the Australian physicist Wallace Thornhill, in the EU 2015 conference, presented his work, The Long Path to Understanding Gravity, a review of the deviation of light during eclipses, pointing to refraction as the real cause of their phenomenon. Other 2 previous revisions of the so-called gravitational lensing had already stated the same conclusions. Thornhill, the work of Professor R.C. Gupta, of the Engineering Institute and Technology of Lucknow, and the retired physicist from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, Dr. Edward Dowdy Jr., who also is a laser optics engineer and member of the American Physics Society. As we proved by these few samples, out of the many examples existent, within the various areas of modern science, one can easily conclude that, at least, not all of the scientific positions accepted by majority, are based solely in the scientific data, That implies that ideological preferences, sometimes, may have occurred. Even the scientific method, despite being the best procedure that one can follow while doing science, is not invulnerable against external threats, as long as, not all reviews and refutation, receive space in the periodics, which gives the false impression that all experts in the field support the proposition.